recently, a hurricane's blown through, and a bunch of people lost electricity in Kentucky. Right. Which, when you compare that to 5 states where a bunch of people have died and towns have been washed off of the map and a dam is missing, it doesn't seem like being without power for a day or two is really a big deal, right?
Right.
And yet, there was at least one group of people who banded together to complain. Mm-hmm. And since they didn't have the internet, do you know how that one panned out?
I think you showed me.
They took their trash cans and they put them in front of their house, not on trash day, those rebels.
Right.
And they got some poster board, presumably left over from their kids' science fair projects. And then they spray painted words on there like, "We're living in hell. Shame, shame. No electricity, no food."
Any misspellings by chance?
Oh, yeah. Everything. Yeah. Rife with misspelling.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just one crazy person. It was a block of about 4 houses in a row. And if the toilet paper shortage and all of the supply chain issues of the pandemic didn't point to the fact that the world could absolutely become the Walking Dead in just a matter of days, then no electricity. We're living in hell during a week where it's 70 degrees and pretty nice out.
Yeah.
That just seals the deal for me. Society is doomed. Humanity is doomed. You are listening to The Soapbox. I'm Paul.
And I'm Eric.
This all started out with a list. What's that all about?
So I've compiled a list over the years of things that just bother me, things that grind my gears. And I shared that list with you.
And I thought, you know what? That would make interesting conversation. Sometimes I'm going to want to agree with you, and it's just going to be something we talk about. Other times, though, I'm going to want to steel man the opposite position because I think that's just interesting conversation.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm always right, but Paul's just a really good debater.
Hey.
All righty. Paul, ready for a good conversation?
I am.
All right. We've got 2 interesting ones, I think. What do you think of the number 3?
It's a good number.
Good number?
Yeah,
okay.
1 better than 2. Not quite as good as 4.
Yeah. All right. Good things come in 3s. I don't know. Yeah.
Is that true? Celebrities die in 3s. Maybe that's not a bad thing, depending on your worldview.
Right. This one we'll start with. We had a little pre-conversation about this. The Monte Hall problem, the Monte Hall Paradox.
I've heard it framed as the paradox. I think it does go by many names.
So what do you know about this?
All right. So the way that I've heard this is there was a game show, Let's Make a Deal, and you were given a choice of one of 3 doors, and one of the doors contained some fabulous prize.
A new car!
The other 2 doors had something silly behind them, like a donkey.
Donkey!
And you didn't want to get a donkey door. You wanted to get a car door.
Right.
So you make your selection, and then Monte Hall comes to you and says, all right, you have picked door number 1. Now I'm going to show you what's behind door number 3. Hey, look, it's a donkey.
Donkey!
Now, I'm going to give you the opportunity to change doors. What do you do?
Right.
And as I understand the problem to be, there is a great schism between the folks that say you stick with what your initial selection is. Obviously, you're lucky you didn't pick door number 3, right?
Right.
And also, I hear people say, no, you need to select door number 2 because it increases your odds. And I think what blows people's mind is the notion that making a change makes any difference at all, because you were given 3 doors, you make a selection, and you've got a 1 in 3 chance.
Yep.
Even if you change, you still had 3 doors initially. It's still a 1 in 3 chance.
Right.
And I think that's where the paradox or the problem exists.
Yeah. So this is very interesting because I had this conversation with people many years ago, and I heard that same kind of go with your gut, stick to your guns, changing
be lucky,
right? And you're right. Where is this mysterious third of a chance going to come from? I mean, you're not going to gain that by switching. Well, it turns out you are. In a way. So I saw this as, I understood the statistics behind it. It made sense. But yeah, it wasn't very
intuitive.
Intuitive, yes.
Right.
Thank you. So then I saw really clever little games, little Java games on the internet where you could actually play this and you could like run it over and over again and tell it, like, all right, let me pick door number 1 and have them do the reveal, and then let me run that 100 times, and how often do I win? And then do that again with me switching, run it 100 times. And
And it would randomize.
It would randomize, and it would do it. And,
Okay.
and yeah, just very clearly, the people that switched doors had a double basically the chance of getting it right than those that didn't. And so people that don't understand code might think of black box, but if you understand the code and you look at it, I mean, that's really hard to argue with, right?
Right. So what's the prevailing logic here for the folks that are still kind of scratching their heads? Because some folks never worked it out. Some people want to work it out, and they're not math people.
Right.
So what's happening?
So, and keep in mind, and I'm sure all of our statistical listeners are going to be laughing at me, but I think I've thought about it in a couple different ways, and it helps me kind of understand it. And the first is you pick a door. You had a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. It's for simplicity. That's like we're always picking door number 1, and then we reveal door number 3 as a donkey.
Donkey.
So what I see going on here is you start with a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. The fact that we reveal one of the doors means we know what's behind it. We're not going to reveal a door and go, whoops, that's the car, right? So we have knowledge of what's behind both doors. So
they may reveal door number 2. They may reveal door number 3.
Right.
It's not that they always reveal the 1/3 chance.
right.
They are not revealing a 1/3 chance. They are just revealing that one of the doors doesn't have something behind it, which changes functionally nothing.
Yeah. So essentially all of the, and I've tried this before and people are like, I don't get it. All of the probability that was behind that door number 3 gets really transferred over to the other one because there are no longer 2 doors to choose from. It's just one. Now, yes, there could be a donkey behind this door, and it could be we got it right the first time. But that's the only scenario where you win. The other scenario would be there is a car behind door number 2, and we open door number 3. And then the third scenario is there's a car behind door number 3, and we open door number 2. So 2 chances for you to be right are right there, and it just depends on where the car is. So that's why your chances, 1 1/3 to stay, 2/3 to change.
And that, I think, is the least intuitive part of the problem, because if I were to try to simplify this, and I think this is how I thought about this the first time I've heard the problem. It's been a number of years now. But I would think of it as, okay, the first time I open a door, I've got a 1 in 3 chance. The second time, I've got a 1 in 2 chance. That's not it.
I don't think so. So what do you mean the second time?
Well, the second time you're presented with the option.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Now I'm either going to stay
Right.
or I'm going to go.
Right.
And if I stay, my chances are not an isolated. There's an interaction between the first choice and the second choice that isn't apparent.
Okay.
So the perception for the folks that maybe have the hardest time understanding the problem is that they think that they've got a 1 in 3 chance the first time they're presented with choice.
Yep.
And that they've got a 1 in 2 chance the second time they're presented with choice.
Yeah.
And that's not the truth.
Yeah.
The truth is that there's an interaction between the choices which bolsters moving in favor of you getting the prize versus you staying and getting the prize.
Right. And I think all of this is predicated on the fact that the person opening the door knows the answer. So they'll never open the door with the car. They'll always pick the other one. So here's another way. I think this is a great non-statistical way of approaching this. And I think it's I don't think I read this anywhere. I think I came up with it. So I'm patting myself on the back, but I could be plagiarizing this too. So if maybe someone else has done this too, and I don't know. But let's look at it this way. There are 100 doors, and you pick door number 1. And then I say, okay, it is not behind door numbers 2 through 54, and then 56 through 100. And I open all those doors, donkeys for days.
Donkey!
And now, do you want us to change?
Did I happen to pick the 1 in 100?
And I mean,
It doesn't feel as much like I'm close, right?
right. And why
because
did I?
you understand emotionally, you understand that your chances 1 in 100 are pretty slim,
Right.
and it doesn't transfer.
Right. And I think the other thing that, at least to me, that illustrates it is, again, I'm not opening doors at random. I'm opening doors. I'm basically going to door number 2 saying, car, no, open. Car, no, open. And I go all the way, and then I get to 56 or 55 or whatever it was.
And then you skip it.
I
Wink,
skip
wink,
it.
wink.
Right. And it's kind of like, and then of course you could scale this up to 1,000, and at what point are you going to just say, well, I mean, I have to change. I mean,
Right.
it could have been behind door number 1, but
Yeah, but the likelihood seems to scale infinitely against your favor.
yeah. And again, as you keep adding doors, I think it goes up. So I don't know if that helps non-math people get it. I don't know if the way I explained it before and the way you explained the interaction, does that get it? I don't know. But I think it's
a fun one to think about. And I think knowing that, and then the other thing about the problem that maybe most people don't think about is when you're in a situation where you're presented with a lot of stress, you do sort of resort to lizard brain a little bit, right? That adrenaline kicks in. And so if you were presented with that problem and you're in front of a live studio audience and you're meeting Monte Hall, who I guess was famous in his day.
Right.
I only know him from this problem.
right.
And there's a chance that you can win a brand new car.
Right.
Well, yeah, you're not going to be in the best mental state to make that choice. And that's probably one of the things they're counting on. So we talked about threes. Let's put this one, our 3 doors, our 3D. Let's put this one on the back burner and let's move to a new 3D. Eric wouldn't give me anything at all on this one, so I'm going in cold. But why don't you set up the second 3D for us?
Okay. So I want to leave, for the moment, I want to add this in. Let's leave 4D out of the 4th dimension out of this for the moment, because I think we can get there too. But do you see in 3D?
Yes.
Okay.
I have 2 eyes,
Yeah.
so I can see in 3 dimensions.
This is exactly why I didn't want to prep you with the conversation, because that's the exact answer I hear from most people when I ask this question. And
Isn't it true, though, that I can measure depth, and that's how I'm able to give a high five 85% of the time, every time?
so it's 60% of the time. But
Pedantic.
I want to say a few things. One, the argument I'm going to make here is a little semantical. But what we're really talking about is, can you see in 3 dimensions? And what you are seemingly saying to me is you can perceive depth, you can perceive dimension, you can perceive.
Yeah, so if I have a point and then I extend a line beyond that point, that's 1 dimension.
Yeah.
I add an additional axis to that.
Yeah. So now we're like a Cartesian plane, right? X and Y.
X and Y.
Yeah.
Right. So that's 2 dimensions.
Right.
Now I'm going to add a z-axis, and I'm going to be able to move within the plane in depth. That's 3 dimensions.
No, that's absolutely 3 dimensions. And I didn't ask if you are 3-dimensional. I asked if you see in 3 dimensions.
I feel like I do.
Yeah, and most people do, and I think that's what makes this a good soapbox. My argument is we don't see in 3D. We see in 2D. We see an image, and because we have the 2 eyeballs, like you were saying, we do have a perception of depth. In fact, that's what they call it, right? Depth perception. But it doesn't add another dimension. It just adds a ability to, as you're turning your head and the way your brain, maps the image, to see if something's in front of something, or you could see if something's closer or farther. But you've probably seen little tricks of the eye where you can have something that looks a little bit smaller, and because of that you think it's farther away, and maybe it's actually closer. Tricks to the eye.
Sure.
A famous one I think is the moon. When the moon is low to the horizon, it looks really big, and that's
because it's magnified by the horizon or something.
No, that may be a good podcast for that one. But no, it's my understanding that you can see it in relation to trees, and you know how tall a tree is, and it just looks bigger when you look at it above. When you above the sky, it's the same size. In fact, you can measure it, but it just looks smaller because you don't have anything around it for context. But It's maybe a little bit beside the point. So for me, I read this fantastic book called Flatland many years ago. Not a very long book, and written anonymously. It's not anonymously. It's like
with like a ghostwriter.
A fake name,
pseudonym.
Pseudonymously or something like that. He was an English teacher or something like that, and it was a very mathy concept, right? He had a three-dimensional being visit a 2D world, right? So I hope I'm remembering this right, but it still helps illustrate the point. So we're 3D right here. You mentioned it, X, Y, and Z. So let's consider that our dimensions, and then let's say we go down and visit a world that lives on a piece of paper. And this great book, by the way, I'd highly recommend it. There was a follow-up called Sphereland that was maybe written by someone else, wasn't as good, but Flatland, great book, and it talked about all the people in this world, the religious leaders were near circles. They had nobody had an infinite number of sides, which is what a circle would be, but they were close to that, and the more sides you had, the higher up you were in the world. And then the soldiers had pointy ends, triangles or something like that. And there was all kinds of conversation about women versus the men. And point being, though, you're a three-dimensional being. You go down in a two-dimensional world and you look at a square. You don't see a square.
You just see an infinitely flat line.
You see a line. Yeah. So in the parallel here is a 3D person goes to a 2D world. Your vision drops by one dimension. So what the person in the 2D world sees is the line. You can't see the back of the square. I can't see the back of your head right now without moving. So my argument here is when I read the book, and then of course they even went to line land, and everyone was dots, right? You'd see, and so you if you're in this world and it has X number of dimensions, you would see in one dimension fewer. So the 2D being would see in 1D, and then as that 2D being comes into a 3D world, you would, again, I see two dimensions. And okay, let me give you one more piece to this, and I would love for your response. Me as a 3D person looking at a 2D world, I can see the entire square. All right, I can see all four sides. Plus, this is the weird bit, I can see the inside of the square. So I can see its heart and lungs, and of course, Flatland was kind of describing this. You know, it's hard to describe this without having a little bit of imagination, right? So the perfect doctor would be a four-dimensional being that could look down at us and see all of our dimensions at once, plus everything inside, completely. We would look weird. Weird. But that's how I see a square. But then if I move into the square's world, kind of take a piece of paper, draw a square, and put your face close to the table and now look over at that square, then again, you see that line. You can't see the back of the square at the same time as you see the front. So
I think the limiting factor that you're introducing is not real. And that's the notion that you have to always be one dimension removed from where you are in terms of perception. Because we're not three-dimensional creatures anyway. We're four-dimensional creatures, right? We exist in space, and space has depth, but space and depth are experienced over time. Right. And so, if we had sensory perception that was limited by an order of one dimension, we'd still see in three dimensions based on the fact that we live in four. But also, I don't know that there's any anything that you've said that necessitates the limitation.
Yeah, I would argue here. I'm talking about space. So I'm talking about, do you see in 3D space? I mean, if we're introducing a fourth dimension, which is time, which is great and interesting, I think. But I'm just literally talking if I could see in three dimensions, which again, I'm not trying to say I'm looking at something I can tell it's a 3D object, because I mean, even a piece of paper is three-dimensional, right? But we can argue that if you go flat enough, paper can seemingly be 2Ds.
down to one atom in depth or something.
Right. So let me argue that. If we took a piece of paper and broke it down to where it was a measure in the X, a measure in the Y, 8.5 by 11, but then the thickness of it was one atom. And let's even argue that only one side of the atom reflects light. If that is the case, then you look at that piece of paper, you see 100% of that piece of paper. There's nothing on that paper that you can't see because it doesn't have a back, because we stripped it from that. We made it one atom, and the back of the atom doesn't reflect it. So it doesn't, let's say it doesn't exist. So I am a 3D being. I'm looking at a 2D object. I can see all of it. And I'm looking at that Pepsi can over there. Thank you, Pepsi, for sponsoring this podcast. And I can't see the back of it. I can't see the inside of it. And I could draw it. I could draw what I see on a 2D sheet of paper, right?
Doesn't that then come with sort of the other assumption that you should have the ability to have perception outside of that dimensional reality? You can perceive a point, you can perceive a line, you can perceive a square.
Yeah.
That sort of linear understanding of the dimensions assumes that it's linear throughout, right? When we don't have organic matter within us, we don't have a new organ that can perceive a new dimension. We don't have a new sense that can perceive a dimension. That doesn't mean that that dimension doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it doesn't mean that it's going to relate to the previous dimensions in the same way that they behave. And aren't there mathematical models to suggest that there's 10, 12 dimensions, something like that?
Sure. But again, I'm trying to clearly say, I'm really asking the question, can you see in 3 dimensions? Not can you see in this world?
But your operational definition of see sort of insists on the notion that you should be able to see all aspects. Maybe we have, instead of seeing in 3 dimensions, maybe we see in 2.5 dimensions, because we don't have the proper sensory equipment. So we understand depth,
right? Because
we have eyes that are slightly spaced apart, that are both sending signals that get mixed in the brain, and that's what's giving us that depth dimension. But it's not perfect,
right?
It's not going to be perfect because we aren't perfect biological organisms, and there's also nothing that makes that necessary for us in survival.
Well, I like your 2.5 dimensions, because that really kind of helps me try to argue what I'm saying. We see, in my mind, actually, literally, in my opinion, we see in 2 dimensions because of the limitations of I can't see your back, and carrying that into the 2D world, to me, it's very analogous, right? Because you move into the 2D world, and now you're square, Paul. Sorry, Paul, you're square. But imagine we're standing shoulder to shoulder, and you turn your head a little bit, and I'm looking at you with one eye, and you're looking at me with one eye. You see just this, the silhouette of my shape, as a line. So we can maybe even argue in the 2D world, they could perceive depth. Like there may be some way they know you have that shape, and you can obviously walk around me. Oh yeah, okay. So I do have 4 sides.
You're making the argument that we perceive the 3rd dimension because of the 4th dimension, because we have the ability to compare movement.
I think we see in 2D much like when you watch a movie. You're watching a movie. Let's leave out a curved screen or whatever. But you're watching a movie. You can. These are just 2D objects, right? That's right. Can we?
Yes.
But they sure look 3D. And in fact, if someone drew a picture of that can, with some pretty clever techniques, you can make it almost pop out of the, use the chalk and make it really pop out of the page. But no one's going to argue that that's 3 dimensions. Sure looks like it. And what I'm trying to say is carry that into the real world. It's really no different. We do have the advantage of first of all, like you said, movement. So as we move, that can give us, that half of dimension that kind of gives us that. I'm pretty sure there's a 3rd. So
all right. So can we find middle ground here and say we see in 2.5 dimensions?
I think I would. I'd concede that, but I'd put an asterisk on it and say, we're not getting that 3rd dimension until a 4-dimensional being came down or look down on us, and they did have that whatever that is to see the fourth dimension, then they could literally see my stomach, my heart, back of my head, basically every layer of me all at once. And again, it would look weird, but they would be able to understand it. And that to me is seen in 3D.
Well, there you have it. If you agree, disagree, we'd love to see some comments on this one. I think this is something that doesn't necessarily have to be settled, since we don't live in a world where it ever would need to be. But if you've got some insight on this one and you want to throw some comments our way, we'd love to read it, and maybe there's a little meat on the bone for future discussion there. Thanks for listening to the Soapbox. Eric, how can people find us?
Well, conveniently, we put everything on our Linktree site. You can go to Linktree, search Soapbox Lex, and you'll find all of our socials there, plus ways to reach us, ways to engage, and some of our original content, so you can see some of the other stuff that we do.